forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Alongside Aaron McIntyre, I am Steve Dace here with another week on Bigger Ten. And what a week it was in the Big Ten. History
Number 70
made.
from Penn State just got called for another false start.
And we're off. I got to say, the amount of folks in the college football media that just could not believe that Kirk Ferentz sided with his own fans over the Penn State coaching staff. I mean, are they this? They cannot be this dumb. Okay? They cannot be this dumb.
It's
that
2015 all over
Yeah,
again.
that even if privately Ferentz thought, all right, some of these guys are clearly injured. It's some of their best players. It's not like we're playing tempo out here. The idea that he was going to say that after his fans basically just won him a football game, to be brutally honest with you, no, not happening. But anyway, I know it was a great week for you as a Hawkeye fan, a great week for the Big Ten as well. And so let's start there with our Big Five here on Bigger Ten. And I was surprised when I saw this number because just if you go back and look at, old time AP polls that, back in those days in the 30s and 40s, it was just a top 10. Then it expanded to a top 20. And in those eras, you saw Big Ten teams dominate the polls. But yet, this is the first time in the history of the Associated Press College Football poll, Aaron, 5 Big Ten teams. 8 would really be something. 5's impressive enough, though. 5 Big Ten teams are ranked in the top 10 of the AP poll. It's never happened in the illustrative history of this conference, in the history of the Associated Press poll. That goes back to 1936. What do you think?
So just like 3 weeks ago, we had an episode here on Bigger Ten that I titled The Bad 10 ? Because we had just come off of a weekend where a number of teams looked really pedestrian, including most of the teams ranked in this top 10 here. Now we're talking about an historic week for the Big Ten in terms of rankings. And I pumped the brakes back then. It's, the Big Ten might be bad, but I don't really know who's great this year in college football. Alabama just lost to an unranked team. They were previously number one. Georgia looks like world beaters, but,
their quarterback's name is Stetson Bennett.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. I don't even know who Alabama. I still don't. I watched most of that Alabama game. I still don't know who's starting at quarterback for
Bryce
them.
Young. Yeah.
So you know what? It's maybe not a great overall year for college football because it's not a great overall year for quarterbacks, which we've talked about before. But that just means there's more probably parity across the entire landscape. It's really, really fun to watch, and that definitely bore itself out over the weekend. Everybody talks about, Iowa, Penn State, and Alabama, Texas A&M. Well, that Arkansas, was it Ole Miss or Mississippi State game?
Ole Miss, Arkansas.
That game was incredible as well. There were a number of close finishes. Michigan, Nebraska, that was a fun game to watch as well. All the way across the board, just a great weekend of college football.
And this dominance of the AP top 10, this could go on for a while when you look at the schedule for the next couple of weeks. So Michigan State has a sneaky game against Indiana. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But should the Spartans get past that, then they have a bye. Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State are all on a bye this weekend. I'm sure Fox Sports is just tickled pink about that. All right.
Yep.
But then the following week, Michigan plays Northwestern, Penn State plays Illinois, and Ohio State plays Nebraska. So, maybe there's an upset in there, but I think we're looking at least 4 teams in the AP top 10, if not all 5 staying there for the next couple of weeks here, Aaron.
Yeah, in the
then they all start playing each other.
As the farther out, I should say, we can stretch this as fans of this league into when the CFP rankings come out. That's going to be incredibly beneficial. So really fun time to be a fan of the Big Ten.
It's very smart to backlog the schedule like this because you build yourself a cushion. We have had, I believe it is now over 40 teams, 40 ranked teams have lost this season. 44 teams, or 44% of the teams that were ranked in the preseason AP poll are currently unranked. And so what happens is, I mean, it's just psychological. If you're Iowa and you're number 2 right now, and you lose at Wisconsin here in a couple of weeks, let's just say in an upset, you're not falling to like 17, right?
Nope.
You might fall at 8, 9, maybe 10 at the most. So you're just one crazy week away if you went out from being right back where you were. And that's the beauty of this. By backlogging the schedule like this, your teams build up a lot of positive reinforcement and energy while everybody else is out there cannibalizing each other. So very smart scheduling by the Big Ten. And then, of course, 5 of the teams this year have cooperated by playing some pretty darn good football, which brings us to topic number 2, your Iowa Hawkeyes. Winning at Kinnick Stadium against Penn State. It's the first time Iowa has won a game pitting 2 top 5 teams against one another since another famous mid-October date at Kinnick Stadium. Number 1 Iowa beating number 2 Michigan 12-10, knocking Sean Clifford out of the game. We'll talk more about him here in a moment. Flooding the field, causing 8 false starts. I had 2 different friends of mine who were at this game who texted me and have said, I've been coming to games here my whole life. I've never seen an atmosphere like this. And given this is known as one of the best atmospheres in all of college football, that's absolutely saying something. It was a special day for Iowa football, beginning with the Fox Big Noon pregame show. Seeing Bob Stoops out there chanting "Go Hawks." I mean, I remember when I first got started in sports talk radio, the first big story I ever covered really was Bob Stoops going to be the Iowa coach, and then he went to Oklahoma instead, right? And so then he's there, getting together with Kirk Ferentz, the crowd that they had out there outside the old state capitol in Iowa City. There, I mean, it was insane. The atmosphere for that pregame show, it carried over to the game, and then the game ultimately did not disappoint to that end as well. But hey, let's turn it over now to the Hawkeye fan because you were living and dying with every play.
Yeah, I mean, there was a certain touchdown catch that I may or may not have thrown my back out. No, I'm not 87. That's how I'm put together. But it was a fun game to watch. It was quintessential Iowa football. I think people around the country and even Iowa fans, when things are not going as well as they are right now, don't quite understand it, especially from the offensive perspective. But especially once Sean Clifford got knocked out, Iowa's philosophy always is, but especially in those situations, we just don't believe you can make enough plays consistently enough to not make mistakes. And making this team drive the length of the field every single time, especially with a backup quarterback in that environment. That was just, they were going to gamble with their defense, and they came up snake eyes. So is that the good one? Is snake eyes the good one? I don't know, but
it depends on the game.
Depends on the game. Yeah. So
7's always good.
Yeah, and I would just say as well, injuries are a part of the game, and I'm not talking about the whole stupid fake controversy with fans booing the fake injured players, whatever. I believe what you want to believe. Sean Clifford getting knocked out. Here's the thing. My brother who lives in Pennsylvania was texting me after the game. Now I have to hear about how Iowa only won because Sean Clifford got knocked out of the game. Now, Clifford had thrown 2 interceptions. Who knows if he was going to be able to make adjustments. As you tweeted from the Big Ten, that was an impossible situation for that backup quarterback to go in. Absolutely. If the roles were reversed, absolutely Iowa fans would be saying the same thing as well. I really believe that was the turning point of the game. There's no question about that at all. Not to say Iowa couldn't have made it close or even won with Clifford in there, but it was going to be a much harder battle as well. I remember Iowa versus Northwestern back in 2009. Ricky Stanzi, rollout right, naked boot, broken leg. You lose that game, and your undefeated season is over. It's a part of the game, and so yeah, Penn State fans, as crazy and just mind-boggling, mind-numbingly, something as you all are. You do. You do have that leg to stand. Well, maybe not Sean Clifford, depending on which part of the body was actually injured. But you do have a leg to stand on as far as that goes. But it was all the atmosphere, really, all the atmosphere, defense, and punter, and that's all Iowa needs in those situations. So fun game if you're an Iowa fan.
We talked at the start of the year about how many teams just didn't have a backup quarterback. Alabama doesn't have a backup quarterback. Clemson doesn't have a backup quarterback. That's why even though DJ Uiagalelei continues to struggle, they have no one else to go to. There's nobody to push him. So you just have to kind of hope he gets it and develops in real time, and you don't end up 8-4 in the process. This is true of a lot of teams this year. Penn State's backup quarterback, Will Levis, he's quarterback of the number 11 team in the country right now at the University of Kentucky, who just destroyed LSU. And now you're in, you go to a kid that I think a lot of people, unless you're a Penn State fan, had no idea what a Taquan Robinson was. This is not some 4-star, 24/7 top Rivals 250 recruit. They don't have a backup quarterback. And there's no question Penn State's odds of winning the game went down when Sean Clifford went down. I don't know anybody could argue otherwise.
Yep.
The idea, though, that they would not have lost even if he had stayed, I would not go that far either, because the game was being played in the way that it was already being framed in the way that Iowa needed the game to be played to win. It was just going to be a matter of whether or not Spencer Petras could make 3 or 4 throws that would make the difference. Well, once Clifford went out, he didn't have to make 3 or 4 throws. Now he needed to make one.
Yep.
Okay? And so that's why the odds of Penn State winning obviously go down. But the idea that it was guaranteed that they would have won had he stayed, this was already kind of being played in Iowa's game flow. Doesn't mean they would have pulled it out. I mean, Penn State came into the stadium 2 years ago at night too, and played a game according to Iowa's game flow, and still managed to pull that one out of the fire as well. Let's go to what's going on with Nebraska. We already broke down this from a Michigan perspective on Michigan Podcast here on the channel the other day. You can go check that out right here on YouTube if you want to look at this from a Michigan perspective. But let's talk about Nebraska. Doug Karsh, the longtime sideline reporter for Michigan football, said that this was one of the top 3, 4, 5 at the most best environments he's ever been to on the sidelines of a Michigan game. I mean, he's been doing this job for at least 10 years. The environment in Lincoln, Nebraska Saturday night was absolutely insane. The Huskers did a lot of things right. They're the first team that had that beat Michigan in the yards per play differential, but the Wolverines had more first downs, were better on third down, and had fewer turnovers. In other words, they were more efficient, and that ended up being the difference in the game with that final fumble by Adrian Martinez, who, for some odd reason, kept trying to fight for yardage, even though for another 2 or 3 yards, even though he already had the first down, ball gets stripped, and that's the ball game. But this has become a familiar story for the Huskers. You could see it with the look on Scott Frost's face on the sidelines after the Adrian Martinez fumble, and Martinez had been brilliant in the game up until that moment. And now you're looking at, this is the longest streak, winless streak, that this school has had against ranked opponents, Aaron, since 1952, Aaron. Okay, like Ward had not yet been hard on the Beeve last night in 1952. Most of America didn't know what an Elvis was in 1952. And so this is the longest streak they've had, the losing streak to ranked teams since then. They have the worst record in college football in one-score games in the last 4 years. Now, why does the last 4 years matter? Who's been the head coach there for the last 4 years? So essentially since Scott Frost became the coach. You keep thinking, you thought this after the way they played against Oklahoma. You thought this after the way they played against Michigan State. And then you probably think it again this week after the way they played against Michigan. You keep thinking they're so close, the breakthrough is just around the corner. It might be. But what if it's not? Aaron, what do you think?
I don't know. With Nebraska, people talk about, well, they just have to learn how to win. What they're doing basically in those games that you mentioned, they're doing the things that you need to win. But they're like one play away every single time. I don't know. I don't know if it's psychological. I don't know if it's coaching. I really don't know. Because it's not just all talent out there, I don't think, with Nebraska this year. You mentioned Can't remember if you mentioned it on Michigan podcast or just off the air earlier this week. They made some coaching adjustments at halftime.
Yes. Totally
took Michigan out of the game. They wanted to play defensively, and boy howdy, it was a barn burner that second half, or at least it felt like it anyway. That was what they. So it's not all just talent to putting out a bunch of highly recruited kids, and dang, you're not very well coached, and so you keep losing these heartbreakers. They're doing things right. They're doing the things that you need to do to win the game. Is this bad luck? Well, after one season, you might say that. After 2 seasons, after 4 seasons or 3.5 seasons, where you're losing all of these one-score games or close games, something's not right. I don't know what it is. I don't know really, if I was a coach, what to do to fix it, other than to just remind your guys, if you're in a one-score game, late in the game, we can't have mistakes.
Just don't be in any one-score games.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be in any one-score games. Unfortunately, I mean, that game ended the same way that I think the Oklahoma game ended, the Michigan State game ended. Adrian Martinez trying to press and do too much at the end. As you said, he looks brilliant sometimes. He has the same touchdown to interception rate, similar touchdown to interception ratio as Spencer Petras, though, right now. He's just much more dynamic than Spencer Petras from Iowa. So he does some things amazingly well, but when it really, really matters, it seems like he's not able to pull them through.
I think he's the overall most physically gifted QB in our league. Doesn't mean he's the best, doesn't mean he's the most prepared. I just think when you look at the overall package he brings together athletically, I think he's the most physically gifted quarterback in our league. And I think one of the reasons he makes these mistakes, Aaron, is they've got a lot of nice players at running back and receiver, right? Who's the guy, who's the Nebraska receiver that if you're the defensive coordinator facing them this week, you're like, you know what? Got to roll our coverages that way, make the other guy beat us. We got to take that guy out of the game. Who is it?
Yeah,
who's the running back that you're like, do we got to stack the box? We can't let that guy beat us.
That's the thing. You know, I can sit here all day long and say Adrian Martinez is the reason they lost all of these one-score games. If they take the ball out of his hands, why are you taking the ball out of Adrian Martinez's hands? So it's an impossible situation.
If I'm a Nebraska fan, I'm probably upset that they didn't run him more against Michigan, actually, right? So, I mean, this is the conundrum. The conundrum is Adrian Martinez tries to do too much. The conundrum is that Adrian Martinez needs to do too much.
Yep.
You know? Yep. And so they're kind of trapped in this loop the feedback loop of misery that they just cannot get out of. Let's go, speaking of quarterbacks, let's go back to Penn State. Sean Clifford, at the time we're recording this, we still don't have an update on his status. The word was it was an upper body injury, and it was clearly not concussion related, clearly not anything lower body mobility. If it was either one of those two things, he's not out there on the sidelines. It was also clearly not anything. There were some early reports. Maybe it was a shoulder, an arm. I don't know, man. I watched him on the sidelines moving those arms and stuff around pretty good. I mean, it didn't look like that was the issue. A lot of the speculation is, and that's really all it is at this point, is that it's a rib injury. Now, they've got a bye this week, and then they've got Illinois. So you could argue they might have consecutive byes, okay? That's good news. You rest him up now for going on 3 weeks before you go to Columbus on October the 30th. The issue with that, though, is he's going to miss, even if he can be back by then, if the pain is manageable by then, he can take a hit by then. You're dealing with the kind of injury, I mean, he has to run. Mm-hmm. He's not good enough to just be a guy that just remains in the pocket. He has to run, and he's a guy that doesn't mind contact at the exact same time. So you're already tender there, and it wouldn't take a cheap shot to go after him because we're in this era now where there's like a strike zone where you can hit quarterbacks, right? And the ribs just happen to be right in the heart of that strike zone, okay? So, I mean, I don't know how he avoids taking repeated shots at that. And then number two, even if he's able to be gone for the next couple of weeks and comes back for Ohio State, dude, he ain't throwing and practicing with his teammates with bruised ribs. You know what I'm saying? They're not out there slinging it around these couple of weeks, keeping their timing and stuff down. He's going to go from not playing and, throwing the ball or doing anything at all to just right into the frying pan October 30th against Ohio State. And that's if you can get him back and healthy. by then. And the same would be true if it's 4 weeks, because then you're 2 weeks later after that is when they play Michigan. So this could be, at least at this point right now, the biggest injury in our conference so far this season.
Absolutely, because of how dependent they are on his ability to run. Because, I mean, this was borne out again against Iowa. Their running game really flows through the quarterback right now. I don't know of a back, or maybe it's their offensive line. I'm not sure what the culprit is there, but their running game is basically their quarterback. And if he's out of there, hopefully this Roberson kid, maybe, with a little bit more practice, can be a serviceable backup for them and actually maybe flash. The situation at Iowa was just, as you mentioned, just impossible. So I wouldn't really necessarily hang up the phone on Roberson quite yet, but by far and wide. I mean, if he were the better quarterback, he would have been starting over Sean Clifford. So of course it's a loss, but that makes sense. And that was my original thought about Clifford based on where he was hit. I told my buddy watching the game with me, I thought that looked like a rib injury, but they never said, and they probably won't until they absolutely have to. So it's something to keep an eye on here. Maybe they just come to the conclusion we have to do something different on offense here. We can't expose Clifford all of these times. We've got to be creative and go a different direction. Get some of our athletes out in space. Maybe get Dotson in the backfield. It's something to change things up and not quite rely on his legs quite so much going forward.
Yeah, there's another angle to this too, is you can't afford to just be questionable with him, because this isn't the NFL where you just can practice these guys all day and night because they're pros, okay? They got class, there's NCAA practice requirements, etc. And the backup here is primordial ooze. I mean, he's just not ready to play on any level at all. Well, you got to get him ready to play. And he's not going to get ready to play. I mean, you know what percentage of the reps Roberson got in practice the week of the Iowa game? I'm guessing it's like 10%.
Yeah, very low.
Because you've got to have your guy ready for a game of top 5 teams. So that's why I said it was an impossible situation. Beyond the crowd, he just didn't get the reps. They couldn't even get the ball snapped. So you can't afford to go into a week, especially if that game is Ohio State here in 2 weeks, where you don't know on Tuesday, hey, Clifford has a good week, we know he can start. Because you can't afford to give Taquan Roberson 50% of the snaps against Ohio State. They're going to get friggin' housed if that happens. So this is something to keep an eye on if you're the Nittany Lions. Something else to keep an eye on to close this out. As the great prophet Chris Felica, the bear over at ESPN, likes to say, this line stinketh. All right? This is like Lazarus stinketh. This line stinketh. Indiana, with Michael Penix out, not that he was great being in so far this year, but with Michael Penix out, opened as just a field goal underdog to top 10 Michigan State. Now, the line's been bet up to 4.5 last I saw, but still. Top 10 team, only a 4.5-point favorite over a team with a losing record and without its starting quarterback. Now, I know this. Those guys out there on the strip, I've been saying this for years, Aaron, they do not work in those palaces out there in the desert because they dumb, right? I mean, and you could see, even the sharps were just like, I know it's probably a trap, man, but on principle, I just have to bet this. And so you saw that line move massively in favor of Sparty. But let's say that didn't happen and it just opened up today and it opened up at 4.5. We'd be doing this exact same segment.
Yep.
4.5, less than a touchdown?
Yep.
Really? So I don't. That line is smelly to me.
Yeah, and I said last week, either on this show or the picks segment, I'm fading Michigan State, not because I disrespect anything they've done so far this year. I just don't know. At some point, they're going to be playing a team that just has their number. I would say the same thing about Iowa as well. I think they'll lose 1 or 2 games before the Big Ten championship game, just for the record. Michigan State, I don't think they're we talked about a few weeks ago, seems like a few weeks ago, how they may be the least deficient team, meaning in a good way, in the whole of the league. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's not some area that's just down one week and it's just exploited. So I would say
Nebraska held Kenneth Walker to 60 yards rushing, for example.
Yeah. So I think they're due for an upset, and it might come this weekend.
We shall see. Well, hey, if you want to get involved with the games this weekend, check out our friends over at DraftKings. DraftKings is an official sports betting partner of the NFL. And if you are hungry for a big win this week, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered. New customers can bet just $5 on any NFL team to win their game. And if they do, you win $200 in free bets. That's right. $5 to win $200 in free bets. You can't beat that if you just win any NFL game this weekend. That's some winner chicken dinner right there. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use the promo code BIGGER10 to bet just $5 on any NFL team to win their game and win $200 in free bets if they win. And you win with the promo code BIGGER10 this week at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. And remember, if you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Gambling Disorder Helpline at 800-270-7117, 21 and older, Michigan only. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for full terms and conditions. Time now for our weekly game of Would You Rather here on Bigger 10. And Aaron, we begin with you. Would you rather have a bye after a big road win like Michigan just had to continue that momentum, or get a week off to rest a beat-up offensive line that had to play 5 different guards on Saturday night? 5 different guards. What would you rather do?
I would rather, it depends on who we play. I would, if it's a big physical game and you've got some guys out with injuries or just beat up, always would rather have a bye. But if it's somebody who's, if you're going to play a team without a pulse, I would just say let's keep rolling. But I would say, since the question is a big road win like that, probably want to have a bye. Do some self-scouting, especially at this point in the season. Season's half over. I would err on the side of having a bye.
Something else I just thought of too, and we mentioned this earlier with Penn State kind of almost having back-to-back byes with a bye and then Illinois, is if these guys are beat up, if you get the bye now, you get an extra week to rest them, because if you're running the ball for 200 yards against a respectable Nebraska run defense playing 5 different guards, you can probably sit those guys against Northwestern too in 2 weeks, right?
Yep.
And give them an extra week of rest. So there you go.
Exactly. This one's for you. Would you rather have Tanner Morgan or Taquan Roberson starting at quarterback for you?
Gosh. Oh my gosh. I can't recall, seeing a quarterback in our league disintegrate like we have Tanner Morgan. Tanner Morgan, and I know they were loaded in that wide receiver room, right? Okay. They had at least 2 pros there, and Chris Ottman-Bell is going to be a pro this year. So all 3 of those starters, they were all pros. One of them a first-round draft pick in Rashad Bateman. But still, man, somebody's throwing those guys the ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had the 4th best quarterback rating in the history of our league that year in 2019. Last year was not good. You just chalked it up. They had, their program just decimated by COVID the whole year, right? So You just throw that away. This year, though, he's like barely throwing for 100 yards in some of these games. It's been brutal all year long. I don't know that he's played a good game this season. So I guess because I've actually seen Tanner Morgan be good to great, I'll go with him, man. But
it's a tough one.
I had to think about it, and I have no idea what a Taquan Roberson is. I'm getting a good look at what a Tanner Morgan is right now. All right, for you, would you rather be Nebraska going on the road to Tanner Morgan's Minnesota Gophers coming off a bye, or Rutgers going on the road to Northwestern coming off a bye, with both the Huskers and Scarlet Knights now in must-win situations if they want to be bowl eligible? So they're both coming off losses. They're both going on the road against teams coming off a bye, and they're both in must-win situations in order to get to bowl eligibility. Which of those two do you think is going into the better situation?
I think it's actually Rutgers. I think it's Rutgers going into a better situation at Northwestern. Northwestern, maybe coming off of the bye, has some things worked out on defense. But I think if I'm Rutgers, I just say, don't give up any big plays to this offense. That it can't make any big plays. Make them earn every single yard on the field. And eventually, we just don't think that defense is going to be able to hold up for all 60 minutes against a run game and against any passing game that we might bring to the table as well. So I think in Minnesota, you've got more of a team with more of a pulse there. And depending on the crowd situation, they're a little bit maybe a more difficult environment to play in as well. So I would rather be Rutgers at that juncture.
Over under on the amount of punts inside the opponent's 40-yard line.
Oh.
In Rutgers and Northwestern, I'm putting it at 3.5.
I'm putting it shoot me, whatever that is. Man alive. I don't even want to think about that. I will not be watching that game. This final one is for you. Would you rather bet Michigan State minus 4.5 against Indiana, which is what the line is right now, or Minnesota plus 4.5 against Nebraska?
I'd rather bet Minnesota because the Michigan State Indiana line stinketh. All right, that is maybe the smelliest line in America this week. Is that line? It stinketh. And if I'm Minnesota, I'm like, hey man, 4.5 is a one-score game. Exactly. We got Nebraska right where we want them, brother. Right? Now, so I wonder about Nebraska's psyche. To me, I think this is a game Minnesota wins or Nebraska rolls. Nebraska goes into this game and says, dude, enough of this bleep, okay? And takes it out on Minnesota, or Minnesota just finds a way to win the game, by one score and, just doesn't hurt itself as much as Nebraska does. I think it's one of those two outcomes. The Michigan State-Indiana line just reeks to high heaven, man. We had a situation earlier this week, happens every few years in West Des Moines, Iowa, where the water's hard, where our septic backed up. We had to call the septic guy out, clear it out, right? Okay. The lingering smell there of your backup septic, that's what I smelled when this line came out.
You're just thinking about Sparty all the time?
No, it's this line. I begrudgingly have to admit, they're fun to watch play.
Sparty?
Between what Kenneth Walker can do, and then they just throw it up to those receivers, right? Reed and Naylor. They're fun to watch play, okay? No. This line smells. We'll come back and get to our Twitter poll and our feedback of the week next. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, 5 Big Ten teams are ranked in the top 10 of the AP poll this week, as we previously said. 1 month from now, when the first college football playoff rankings are released, how many Big Ten teams will be in the top 10? By a clear majority, 52% of you said 3. That's also how I voted. 25% of you said 2. 18.4% of you said 4. 4.6% of you said 5. So those come out after the games the first week in November, I believe, is when those come out. Mm-hmm. All right. And so that last Saturday in October, we're going to have Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, Penn State, Ohio State. So how many teams do you think the next Tuesday are in the college football playoff rankings?
I think the most likely is 3. That's how I voted as well. I think Iowa will at least be in the top 10. Ohio State will be. I think Michigan will be as well. Not sure about Penn State, and I don't think Michigan State will be in there. Do you think
assuming that's Penn State's second loss, for example. Yeah.
Yep. Do you think it's more likely that there's 2 teams or 5 teams?
I think it's more likely there's 5 than 2. I do.
See, I do as well.
Because they're padding, we said earlier, they're giving themselves some padding right now while everybody else doesn't have as much of a backloaded schedule, right? All right, let's get to this week's feedback of the week. Now, I wouldn't bet either one of those numbers, but if I had to bet one, I'd bet 5.
Yep.
Coin Rattle says, as they beat each other in the Big Ten, they drop. As SEC teams beat each other, they rise.
That's the game.
I loved what Tom Frenelli, who's a Big Ten homer, Illinois grad, what he said on the Cover 3 podcast, which I think it's the best college football podcast in the country, by the way. And he said, hey, the way the game is played, Alabama cannot be in the playoff now. They lost to an unranked 2-loss team. I mean, those are the rules. Those are the rules we go by. And you see it, so much of the media in college football is either directly tied or fans of the SEC.
Yep.
And so Oklahoma and Texas are playing a game where I still think no one's been tackled the whole game, right? And that's a garbage game. Arkansas and Ole Miss do that. Oh wow, this is what an incredible football game this is, 52-51. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Georgia and Clemson. Now Clemson's not in the SEC, but same region. Georgia and Clemson are like first one to get a first down wins, right? Wisconsin and Penn State do that week 1 earlier in the same day,
Yep.
and it's setting football back to 1869, right? This is the double standard we have to deal with all of the time.
Yep, and I would say the good news is that we can always kind of fight it out on the field. That is true to some extent if your name is Ohio State until the playoff is expanded, and then there really is a little bit more parity opportunity. But that's just the game. That's the game right now is, you're a member of the SEC and it was bestowed upon you specialty or just means more. That's the game of college football right now. It is the SEC sport, as much as it pains me to say that, but that's really true in terms of a fan perspective, or in terms of a media perspective.
Yeah.
It's the SEC's.
And by the way, you Texas and Oklahoma fans that were chanting SEC on game day,
Oh,
I mean, honestly, pathetic. That's like a cult. Okay, come on. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. We're back at it again next week to break it all down, try to make sense out of it as best we can right here on YouTube or iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. However you watch or listen, please remember to like, rate, share, subscribe, 5-star review, follow, etc. Help us to find more and more Big Ten fans just like yourself and keep up with what we think about all things Big Ten and more by following us on Twitter at Bigger10. Until the next time, for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace.